Our next speaker is Aanchal Garg. Aanchal came to the program having had experience in science communication and education and working with frontline communities who are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. She got a chance to go to the UN negotiations on biodiversity in Colombia this fall, where she continued her pursuit of better understanding the impacts of colonialism on conservation and the intersectionality of the conservation movement, especially in the world of biodiversity. So she's been spending this year really uncovering and putting daylight on a lot of important issues and nuance, and I'm excited for her to share some of what she's learned with all of us today. Please welcome Aanchal.
What you're doing, you're becoming a Cuchumayo in grad school, the one who knows. As a Cuchumayo, as a teacher, there's a responsibility to teach a correct history, to teach a correct knowledge. And that hasn't been done in the past. The truth is the truth. And one way or another it will be taught. I'm from the Ipai Nation of San Isabel, one of the 18 federally recognized tribes here in San Diego. As an Ipai, as a Kumian, we are the survivors of a Holocaust. We are the survivors of a genocide. If we look at the pedagogic system that has been used in the United States, it's filled with romanticized lies. I'll just call it like it is. Our own native epistemology or organic science has been acquired through thousands of years. San Diego, the military has taken special interest in. Why? Just because of our location. It's a harbor, it's a bay. They dredged and they created a berthing for the ships. We're going on to sacred land, which is throughout here, and we have to ask for permission to get there. So that has been troubling.
I have taught here at UCSD for 35 years. My work deals with issues that have to do with militarism, migration, and refugees. Scripps Institute of Oceanography was the precursor to UCSD. UCSD was established in part to continue the mission of Cold War research and wasn't ever imagined to be a comprehensive university that we now are. Any of the issues that we are facing cannot be addressed singly by any of the disciplines. That kind of knowledge of what links histories and what links people is so key to imagining how we can work together. When we talk about the military, we're not talking about the Pentagon only. We're not talking about the armed forces only. We're not talking only about the federal budget that goes into defense only, but that militarism is also a culture that all of us are a part of. US militarism, military practices around the world contribute directly to the displacement of the people in those parts of the world and how then those people end up in San Diego, because San Diego is one of the largest refugee receiving counties in the US. So if we want to understand how power works, we don't necessarily begin with power, but we began with the people who are subject to the power.
I did 9 years in the Navy. I did not want to make a career. I wanted to get my education. I got that. But it didn't mean I was blind. I seen what was going on. Why do we have such a large Navy? To project power. You can paint it any way you want, but in the end, military science will trump anything else because it's for national security, and it's have an advantage over any adversary. They don't care what they do in order to get to it. The ones who have really helped, for the most part, have been the students.
I look at the way that the tides transfer energy to dissipation, and I'm funded by the Office of Naval Research currently. I think that there's this idea of science as objective and neutral and ultimately innocent because of those first two things. The US empire expands into the oceans, and the most obvious connection is that a lot of oceanography research goes directly into the hands of the military, and as graduate students, maybe people who had a little bit more experience, we could create a space for people to start to have those conversations. The undergraduate to military pipeline is a term that we've started using in these workshops, but I think that it really refers to this path of least resistance that has been constructed between university majors and careers in defense. We usually start in a big circle, and we take a lot of time for everybody to share, especially in the first meeting, to really just get into like what brought you here. And I think that giving people that time to just expand and feel like they have space in the room is huge. Just working against that feeling of isolation and feeling like you don't have any options. It's a lot harder to make a career for yourself if you decide that you don't want to work in military-funded projects. And that's why I think it's important to have support networks to help people figure it out.
I have been at Scripps more or less forever, but let's just say many decades. Most of what I study these days are kind of the physics of resistance and how those resistance movements are tied to landscapes. Science students at Scripps and at UCSD have been expressing a dissatisfaction with the way that the science curriculum and the science that they study and they do research on is deeply connected to systems of power and injustice. I basically designed a course to introduce students to some of those critiques, introduce them to that literature, and then also introduce them to ways that people in the past and the present are organizing to create alternative ways of doing science. And I chose the title Subversive Science because subversion is basically this idea that we're going to be embedded within this system of power, but we're going to use that position as a way of undermining that system or aspects of that system in order to move towards justice.
A chapter of my thesis that I'm working on is the role that oceanography has played in imperialism and in colonization. The hope is that, through greater funding transparency and through telling these stories when we're training oceanographers, that people can come into the field with open eyes a little bit earlier and to use that context to make decisions about the kind of science that they want to do. It's hard to address problems that are important to communities that are affected by climate change if nobody wants to pay you to do that, which oftentimes nobody does. And I think that I would love to see a Scripps that is more capable of addressing problems that really affect people.
I study physical oceanography, particularly around Greenland. The people who found the UCSD Green New Deal felt like there wasn't a group that was taking kind of a higher level of protest action to challenge the way our local campus and university operates in terms of its contribution and complicity with the climate crisis. The military is a huge source and or rather a huge consumer of fossil fuels, and so a huge source of climate pollution, and that's a problem. We have the ability to make local, small-scale change, and We're actually really fortunate that our university is huge. We use an inside-outside strategy as a way to push as many levers as possible. At the same time, you're trying to make change within the institution, and then from the outside, you're trying to pressure the institution to change in dramatic ways. To paraphrase from Naomi Oreskes' mission, Science on a Mission, funding shapes the questions that we ask and therefore the answers that we find. Tobacco industry funding led to increased transparency and stricter policies in the health spheres. Coming from that perspective, it was really easy for them to see we need this for fossil fuels and climate research. The UAW transitional funding initiative, I know there were students at Scripps who were really keen to see that because they found themselves in the position of being like, oh, I'm funded by the military and I don't want to be, and I want to switch research, funding, PI, whatever, but like then I'll have this few months, who knows how long, period of uncertainty.
Transitional funding is a good idea for so many reasons, because it gives grad students more power over their own research.
I think it's really important if you're someone who's trying to push for some social change or institutional change to have community to do that with.
Cool. So you guys just saw the first 10 minutes of a snippet of a film that I created for my capstone. You just heard a myriad of students and faculty from Scripps and UCSD talk about their stories in resisting systems of power in STEM fields like oceanography and beyond, whether that's through subversive science or funding transparency initiatives. Now, as they speak throughout the rest of the film, they talk about how community is at the center of social and environmental justice, and students can find that community through organizations like UCSD Green New Deal and Researchers Against War, as well as the Academic Workers Union. Similar to how those institutions or how those organizations have built community to advocate for institutional change, I have found resources and support for this project through my own capstone advisory committee. For their dedicated mentorship and encouragement throughout this filmmaking process, I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to Mariah, BT, and Jules. Now, I can't forget my MAS MBC cohort for providing encouragement as well, and especially for my fellow cohort members, Ann Madden and Caitlin Kenny, for not only being my supporting film crew, but also collaborating to plan the 2025 MAS Film Festival, which is where the remainder of this film will be premiering this Friday just up the hill. So if anyone is curious about the remainder of the film and the advice these academics have about the current political moment, please go ahead and come to the film festival. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'll turn it over to questions.
That was incredible. What has your experiences joining these student clubs and finding this community like? What's something that you would like to share that you've gained out of finding this new community at UCSD and Scripps?
That's a great question. I think you can gain some of what my source Charlotte talked about in the film, is that to work against those feelings of isolation that may come from specializing so intensely in one field for a PhD or a master's program. But what I really found to be the most helpful was the interdisciplinary aspect of the advocacy work that they're doing, from collaborating with students on upper campus to kind of bridging the gap between the STEM and humanities. I think that is the most cutting edge research that we could do now in marine science as a field. And so I would love to continue those conversations and have this film act as that kind of conversation starter on how we can bridge those gaps between intellectual fields. Yeah.
And then Aanchal, we have one more question coming from online. Did you find any specific on-ramps for people with less experience in interrogating these narratives around militarism? To elaborate, how can we plant the seed to get people to start interrogating narratives around militarism?
That's a great question. And I would rely on something that Dr. Espiritu said in the film, which is that if you want to examine the systems of power, you don't start with the systems in the first place, but you start with the people and their stories. And so even throughout my journey, all I started doing was asking questions, and the people who had the answers kind of raised their hand and were able to guide me along the way to having these conversations. So I would say the people who are really, and they'll go on to say in the film that there's a lot of community that is to be built in advocacy and environmental justice as fields. So it's just about finding where those communities start and then being able to bridge the gaps through coalition building. Yeah.
Thanks, Aanchal.